So I am going to tell you a story. So this is me wearing almost exactly the same outfit, not so much beard. And I think it's fair to say if you look at me, you kind of see a pretty typical career in technology. I'm kind of everything that you would expect someone to be by the time they got 43. I'm the VP of something at a company, somewhere everything looks like it's going fine. But that story you see from the outside when you look at my LinkedIn profile or my resume uh, hides a story that you don't see. And one thing I could never quite figure out is why I would go through these patches where work would come easy and all the creativity would be there, and I'd have these great ideas, and I'd just have the focus and the will to focus them through, and I could just, I knew who to set up meetings with when and what document we needed, and I could do the budget in my head. Then it would go. And sending an email got really, really difficult. Like sitting in a meeting for an hour, was like someone scratching, fingernails across a blackboard. So this thing had followed me through my career. I could never quite figure it out. But despite that, as I said, life had gone pretty well. I'd started my career in 1998, entered the workforce, and I'd started a company building mobile applications. For all those of you out there who ever started a business before the market was ready, didn't work out, probably early by about 15 years. But that got me my next job, which was with a company where I led their mobile solutions practice, selling mobile applications to enterprises. Kind of did that for a while, but got bored, and I'd worked with these people from Microsoft, and I thought, Microsoft, it's a big, successful company. I want to go try myself there. So I applied for a job out in Redmond. I was living in the UK, applied for a job in Redmond. Somehow got the job as a product manager, not sure how. They flew me over, and I started a new life here in the US. I actually remember being sat on the plane, looking at the Atlantic Ocean below me, thinking, I have no idea even what a product manager does. And if they figure that out, this is going to be a real short trip, and I'm going to be on the plane back the other way. Fortunately, though, got a good manager. They hadn't hired me because I knew how to be a product manager. So I kind of learned that skill. Spent 7 years at Microsoft doing lots of different things, running events and working on, lots of different products. And kind of got bored of that in the end. So a friend of mine had gone to HTC, the phone manufacturer. And so I jumped ship to HTC about 2010. And by the time I got to HTC, I was a director of program management. Incidentally, program management also something I didn't know how to do. There is a theme in my career. And things were going pretty well. I was flying back and forth from Seattle to Taipei. I had a team out there, keeping very busy, working very hard. And life looked good. Had a house in a nice neighborhood, bought the house, had, car paid off, had 2 children, Tilly, Lila, married to Amy here, and everything's going fine. This is July 4th, 2012. This is Ella Bailey Park, by the way. If you're in Seattle, it's one of the best views of the city, but not well known. A couple of weeks later, I woke up here. This is Harborview Hospital in Seattle. It's the main hospital they take people to when the emergency services pick them up. I ended up there because the night before I'd played soccer, as I did every Tuesday. And after my soccer game, I went to an Italian restaurant stroke bar with some friends, had a few beers. And just before I was leaving, I thought, I'll take Amy home a little sort of gift. And Amy loves tiramisu, and they had this thing on the menu called berry misu. So I picked that up, and off I went home. And I arrived, the dutiful husband, bringing gifts. And I said, hey, look, I brought you a gift. And she said, I don't like berries. And I took that quite badly. Look at me bringing this thoughtful gift home. And we got into this argument, a fight, and Amy, because she's wonderful, had the good sense to go upstairs to bed. But I was furious. I'd done a good thing. I'd done a nice thing, right? So I started drinking. I started off making old-fashioned cocktails. I was very into craft cocktails at the time. I had a few of those, and that really wasn't getting it done, so I just picked up a bottle of vodka and started drinking vodka straight out of the bottle. And when I was done with that bottle of vodka, I decided I didn't want to drink on my own anymore. So I wanted to go be with other people who were drinking. So I walked up the street, still in my soccer clothes, by the way, at the bar up the street called Targi's, which is like a dive bar. You know, it's a dive bar because the bartender only has one arm. Stayed there until about 3 a.m. At some point, I was berating the bartender for not making good Sazerac cocktails, got behind the bar, showed him how to do it. And got home. Amy was understandably very worried because I disappeared out of the house, crashed through the front door, hit the couch, passed out immediately. Next thing I remember, voices I didn't recognize in my house. And I got these kind of flashes going in and out, you know, like in a TV show, right? Where, you know, someone's in and out of consciousness. Like I remember being put onto a gurney, and I remember being put into an ambulance, and I don't remember anything about the journey, but I remember being wheeled into the hospital and watching the lights, you know, like in hospital shows, go whew, 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 above me. And then I passed out and didn't wake up again until the morning. It's kind of strange when you're a person who thinks of yourself as like, I'm successful, I've got a family, like life is going the right way, to find yourself waking up in hospital with acute alcohol poisoning. I had 0.35 blood alcohol at that time. I don't know what the drink drive limit here is in California, but in Seattle it's 0.08. So I was more than 4 times over the legal drink drive limit. Actually, it's enough to put most people into a coma. What I didn't realize was that over the years running up to that, I'd been drinking more and more and more and more. Something was going wrong, and I was trying to drink it away. I was lucky to wake up, and after a little while, a member of staff came by and asked me a question. It was one of a couple of questions people have asked me in my life that have changed my life forever. The question she asked me was this: do you think you're trying to hurt yourself? I stopped for a minute, and I desperately wanted to say, no, of course I wasn't trying to hurt myself. I'm a successful person. Look at me. Like, we don't kind of harm ourselves in any way. But no wouldn't come out. And I waited a few seconds, and the truth came out, and the truth was yes. In fact, what I tried to do was to drink so much that I didn't wake up that morning. When you wake up in a Washington hospital with acute alcohol poisoning and tell them that you've effectively tried to commit suicide, they put you into the psych unit. Somebody comes by and does an evaluation. And that was the first time I heard the words, I think you might be an alcoholic. Got connected up with a chemical dependency counselor once I got out of hospital, and she worked with me for a while. And what she helped me see was that I had kind of a distorted view on the world. I had a distorted view on what's important, and part of it came from I'd grown up in what I assumed was a normal household, but turns out to be very, very dysfunctional. And I'm laughing because, like, at this point, you know, it's gone, it's in the past, nothing I can do about it. But, you know, my mother was emotionally abusive to sort of me and the rest of my siblings. I had some run-ins with sexual abuse. It was pretty grim, I've since learnt. But it was great. I started to get back on the road to recovery. I started reading self-help books, like, you know, they were going out of print and you wouldn't get them anymore. I started doing all this kind of inner work, and life started to go really well. I went to AA meetings. I learned the power of community. I learned the power of sharing your story, you know, with other people, and what it was like for somebody to be there for somebody else, because I'd always assumed that everyone was out there to get you. So things were going really well until they stopped going well again. And, you know, I got sober in 2012. And by 2014, things had started to slide. And it had come on slowly. I hadn't really noticed it coming on, but, you know, little frustrations were building up in my life. I was less and less happy with how things were going, with kind of my job, kind of any issues that, might have been coming up in our relationship. I was starting to feel less and less in control. And by 2014, the fall of 2014, I spent, while still working, by the way, showing up at work every day, I spent about 17 days straight thinking about ways to kill myself. And that culminated in a trip to HTC's headquarters in Taipei, and going to the top of their 17-story office building and standing thinking, should I jump? Fortunately, I didn't. I managed to get home and had a couples counseling appointment a few days later, something that, I'd suggested to Amy that we do to work on our relationship. And the counselor was asking me, because I was what I now know to be a depression, so I was like having a hard time seeing the positive in anything. And he was like, do you believe that Amy loves you? We'd been together probably for 20 years at that point, give or take. She'd been with me through thick and thin. And I couldn't find it in my heart to say yes. Wouldn't say, like, yes, she loves me. So it's kind of the second thing that changed my life. The counselor we were working with, Richards, he sat down, we sat in his chair. I might fall out of the chair when I try this, but he kind of leaned forward all attentively and he said, James, he said, you've been doing great. He said, you've been working so hard, and you've stopped drinking alcohol, and you've gone to AA meetings, and you've done all this like inner work, and you've started meditating, and you're exercising, and you're trying to eat right. He said, but I've seen you here before. It's not the first time. And I think maybe there's something else going on. Like, would you consider going to see a psychiatrist to see if there's anything diagnosable? Well, again, like, I'm British, we're stoic and we don't have problems, but I'd done enough at that point that I decided it was time to go talk to someone. So he connected me with a psychiatrist that I still see. And she gave me a questionnaire. She asked me a lot of questions. She asked for permission to call kind of people who'd been close to me in my life to understand, what their experience of, kind of me and my life was. And that was the first time I heard somebody say that you have bipolar. So it seems like lots of people in this room are fairly well educated, but if you don't know, bipolar is a mood disorder. So you might be familiar with depression, and depression means that sometimes your mood drops to kind of an abnormally, low level. With bipolar, you get some of that, and then you get this other state called mania or hypomania sometimes, where you're in a very, very elevated energy state. You feel very confident, and you feel very in control and creative, and you've got energy to work. And, some people who have severe bipolar can go for days or weeks without sleeping because they just have so much energy coursing through their veins. So one thing suddenly became clear in my work. Why did I always run fast and slow? Because of these two different mood states. When I was in that state of hypomania, like, work was super easy, easier than you can possibly imagine. And then that would eventually lead to the depressed state, and I would be, laid low. So my doctor put me on a medication called lamotrigine, which I still take and happened to work well for me. And started working with her, doing more talk therapy, and life got pretty good again. Things stabilized, and he's doing great work at work. I decided to switch gears. I decided I wanted to enter the HR profession. I spent my career building products, so I wanted to give HR a try, build organizations, and that kind of switch to HR had put me on the path to coaching. So I kind of saw that as a useful tool set. So I took a coaching class. And it was in that class that I realized that we're not talking about mental health. Probably should have been obvious to me already. Don't know it was. But when you train to be a coach, you do a lot of peer coaching. So you sit down with somebody else and who's training to be a coach, and you do a coaching session with each other and share what you learned and things like that. And I was doing a peer coaching session with somebody called Shwanda. And from a mood perspective, I'd been coming out of my like hypomania, like I'd been super focused and energized for a couple of weeks, and I could feel myself sliding into the depression. And the worst thing about bipolar, well, I don't know if it's the worst thing, but one of the frustrating things is like you get to feel how easy life can be, and you get to feel how bad life can be. And when you know you're going from top to bottom, like it's just the worst. And by the way, there's a series, Modern Love, on Amazon Prime. The third episode of that, somebody had back seen it, with Anne Hathaway, is kind of she plays a character who's bipolar. It's by far the best rendition I've ever seen of bipolar. So thoughtfully done. So anyway, coming off this high and I'm slipping into the low. I'm in this peer coaching session, and somehow we get to talking about kind of like how I'm doing. So I start to share with Shwanda, like what I just shared with you about like, oh, it's exhausting going between these two, up, it's down, I'm up, I'm down. And she's like, wow, I'd never heard anyone talk about that before. She says, fascinating. I didn't know what kind of bipolar was or like how it worked, which isn't an unusual reaction, but she worked in HR, and specifically she was in employee relations. And I was like, if anybody, and she works at Boeing, if anybody should understand like a very common mental illness like bipolar, which is like 1 in 40 people, right? It should be you. So it sowed this seed in my head that like we need to do more to kind of educate people about these conditions that are in, you know, people to your left, to your right every single day. That still wasn't enough for me to do anything about it. So I just had this idea in my head, like I want to tell stories about mental illness. So then I met somebody, a woman I know who works in the HR field was like, oh, I just met this person, like, oh, you should love her, like come to coffee, like we'll get coffee together, like it'll be awesome. So I went for coffee, I met this young lady here, and we had this, you know, amazing conversation about like she'd just come back from this retreat in, South America, where she'd been doing kind of yoga meditation classes, and she had all these plans that she, you know, things that she wanted to do, and so we just became really close friends. You know when that happens, like you meet somebody and like it's like you've known them your whole life. So we got really close really quickly, and what I learned, you know, as I shared my story and what was going on for me was that she too had a journey since she was a teenager with mental health and mental illness. She's dealt with anorexia, been diagnosed with, depression. So we became a real kind of support network for each other, just kind of sharing what was going on, texting back and forth, how are you doing, and it was great. So it broke my heart when November 27th, 2017, my friend died by suicide. I'd had to watch her over the last few months of her life get more and more helpless and more desperate, trying to get on top of this illness that was just hollowing her out from the inside. I would spend hours on the phone as she tried to decide what the right thing to do, or why this medication wasn't working, or why the rehab she'd gone to, you know, had made her feel worse rather than better. And nothing I did could change that trajectory. Her memorial service was in January of 2018 at the University of Washington. She's a University of Washington grad. And by the way, I'm very intentionally not using her name. It's this beautiful room, and for 2 hours we heard these stories of this beautiful, funny, happy, smart, ambitious young woman who had all these projects and so much, so much that she gave the world. She was such a great friend. But not once did anyone say suicide. Not once did anyone say depression. we were having this celebration of somebody's life, but we were only willing to tell half the story. And since we've agreed that cussing is okay, I was fucking furious. It still makes me angry to this day. Fortunately, I have enough self-control. I didn't stand up and say, this is bullshit, we're only talking about half the story. But I walked out of that thing more certain than I'd ever been. I had to do something. There's 200 people in that room we let down by not telling the truth. And it became my mission to make sure that we started having more of these conversations. Somebody was asking me earlier about grief and how I deal with the grief of losing my dear friend Kay. And the answer is I turned it into something. So as you heard me mention already, I now host a podcast called Silent Superheroes, and I tell the stories of people who work with a mental illness. And I do that for a specific reason, because it's too easy to think of mental illness as, the person sleeping in a shop doorway, or the person shouting at the clouds, or someone locked up in, the mental health hospital. And the truth is, as we've already seen today, the people managing mental health, mental illnesses are with you every day. 1 in 40 of your colleagues have bipolar, like by the stats of the, by stats of the country. So in each of these episodes, I talk with someone who has a mental illness. We've talked about anything from, I mentioned, body dysmorphic disorder, bipolar, anxiety, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, even epilepsy, which you wouldn't necessarily think about in that category. But somebody with epilepsy still has this kind of internal condition that they're managing, that they're a little unsure about whether they should talk about. With epilepsy, sometimes of course you're forced to talk about it because you have a seizure. So what I thought we could do is just listen into some of these stories from people. So Willow, I think, is playing the role of audio engineer here. And what we're going to hear from Amanda. So Amanda has bipolar, like me. There are 2 types of bipolar type 2, type 1. I have type 2. She has type 1. What's the difference? I tend more towards being depressed than manic. She's depressed and manic in about equal quantities. And her mania is more severe as a result. So let's hit Amanda.
In our apartment, there was this teeny little fake patio.
Right.
And I was so happy.
Uh-huh.
I was like, this is the pinnacle of my life.
Uh-huh.
And so I went and I stood out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I could jump.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I must have been out there a good minute.
Yeah.
I could totally jump. And I was like, and Catherine will sleep through it all. She sleeps through the night. We're good.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
she doesn't say anything. Somebody finds me on the street, calls 911. They cart me away.
Well, then more than that, I'm like, oh, my husband's on the plane. He's already on the plane to get home.
Yeah.
So we're
So he'll be home.
And it was like, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's going to be so mad at you that you did that.
Yeah.
And that's what brought me back. I was like, I was out there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've even told him that either.
Yeah.
Should probably tell you. But yeah, it was so dangerous.
Yeah. After being on the balcony, Amanda didn't get help right away. In fact, she lived with the cycle of mania and depression for another 2 years, until her depression overwhelmed her instincts as a mother, and that put her on the path to get help. So yeah, that was Amanda talking about sort of the first time she considered suicide as an option, and kind of the way that you think about it and rationalize it. Like her baby daughter, Kat, was in bed, and she's like, well, she's in bed, and she won't know. And it was the fact that her husband would be angry at her that stopped her there. She eventually went to hospital and got diagnosed when she was driving, I think, in Texas with Kat, and Kat wasn't strapped in because she just thrown her in the car because she was frustrated, and then she put the brakes on, and Kat flew forward a little, and she's like, okay, that's not what a mother normally does. And so thankfully she got help, and she's been awesome. So I think now that was her experience of getting diagnosed. But now let's hear about her experience of work. And the context I need to give here is that she's a pharmacy technician in a hospital. Actually, she's not anymore. and you'll see why. But she's a pharmacy technician in a hospital. And so her job obviously is to kind of work with medications and tablets and things like that, and work with doctors on making sure the dosages are right and stuff like that. And so let's hear kind of how she gets treated in her work by doctors as somebody with bipolar. I wanted to hear more about how Amanda experiences her bipolar in her work and the effort that she puts into managing it.
Work for me is a huge downer, because what I do is so task oriented. Do it this way, you have to be perfect because you can't make people sick, but I am sick, that's a whole other conversation, but you must be correct, and that's fine. If I don't do it the correct way, then they give me crap.
Right.
Like, you're not doing it right. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry, I'm working on it.
Yeah.
And so I fix it. No big deal. And then when they come and, conference with me, like, why are you doing it poorly? I'm like, what do we need to help you with your skill set? I'm like, it's not the skill set. It's that my brain,
right.
I temper it. Like if I were to, at work, I could easily go into mania at work and get it all done in 4 hours. Mm-hmm. And then I could just sit back and have happy hour at work because I'd be done.
Yeah.
But I'm not fun. I'm not really fun. I'm not even functional really. I'm so, and then I don't want to be pushed into a depression for the evening.
Right.
So I temper it because this forces me to slow down. Because if I'm too fast, I can't bring it back.
Yeah. So
when I have these conversations with my bosses, that will trigger some hypodepression because I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I'm such a horrible person. I should be faster. I should be able to communicate with people better. I'm like, why am I like this? Why am I like this? I'm like.
So are you, and I use the expression out, are you out with your?
My bosses know, and they know I'm on my meds, but I don't think that they realize how intense it gets. Mm-hmm.
So her doctors that she works with are unable to kind of make the connection between her mental state and how the way she is managed affects her, and the danger for her of going into a period of mania, because it's kind of like it can kind of skyrocket and go off the rails, right? So that's a pretty rough situation. Amanda has since, keep in touch, since moved on and is in a much better place now where people are much more kind of understanding and supportive of her needs in the workplace. So I guess if there's any message in that, it's if you don't treat people with mental illness well, they'll leave and go somewhere else. And, retention is usually important for most companies. So next thing we're going to hear from is a gentleman called Reed. And Reed's experience is quite different than Amanda's. He'd been struggling for a while with some physical symptoms, which was kind of coming as a stomach problem he couldn't get on top of. And what he eventually learned was that actually he was dealing with depression. And so what we're going to hear from now is Reed and how kind of he figured out with his workplace how they could best support him.
I'm lucky. It was incredibly supportive, right? He offered ideas and suggestions for how I could tackle getting things done at work while figuring out my health-related issues.
So you were able to tell him that I realized I'm in a severe depression?
Not for a long time. No, it took a while, but I was able to tell him, hey, I've been kind of nauseous for a week and I don't really know what it is. And he was like, no worries, man, take a day off, go work from home. And so again, because for me, it was actually physical symptoms that led me to then understanding the mental symptoms or the mental things that were happening. And it was actually not until a little while later when I'd been kind of investigating or working on these physical symptoms of nausea that I went and sent an email to all 4 of the leadership teams. I just said, hey, kind of Reed's health update, here's where I'm at. And most of it talked about going to the doctor and trying to get this thing figured out. And, I'm going to work from home a bit, but I'm still here and I'm being strong and tough and I'm getting shit done. And at the very end of one of the emails, eventually I was like, And there might be some mental health things. I'm not really sure. I just kind of kept giving them weekly updates. And it wasn't until, probably a month or two later where it was like, look, here's the situation with my mental health. I'm working on getting better. I'm working on it back to 100%. I want to make sure that you're getting a good return on investment on me as an employee. And so if you feel that you're not, like, let's talk about that. I almost like wanted them to fire me so I could not feel like I was, again, being a burden or like not living up to my expectation. And thankfully, instead of firing me, my CEO and the other leadership in our company are caring human beings. And the response I got was something along the lines of, we'll follow your lead on this. Like, you do what you think you need to and let me know how we can help. He said that and I still felt like shit because I still felt like I was failing in my job and I wasn't performing at the level that I could be performing at. And so thankfully, after a few months of this struggle, I think my CEO and their leadership team recognized that my mental health challenges aside, having an operations manager that isn't in head office and works so far away physically and time zone wise, maybe this was just a bad fit. And at the time, we had some opportunities show up to fill a job role of a customer success manager, which is also a job I've done in previous companies. And so that happened around the time where I'd been struggling for a few months. My physical health was starting to get better. My mental health was, not great. I took on that new job role. And again, that was like an immediate kind of shift or change point where, okay, now I've got a job role that's a bit more tangible. Like,
that was a hard cut. So in Reed's case, they were able to find a different job that suited him better. As it happened, as he said, operations manager being somewhere else wasn't working so great. So he found something where he said like it's more tangible, meaning like he got more feelings of success from the customer support role than he did from the broad operations role. So I've talked to a bunch of people about this. What have I learned? Time and time again, people get help once things get really, really, really bad. They're standing on the balcony thinking about jumping off. They're putting their daughter's life in danger. They're considering jumping off a tall, building. Their anxiety has got so bad they can't go to work anymore. So I would say anytime anybody has a sense of like, is it normal to think and operate this way? Good time to go talk to somebody and find out if that's normal. Worst thing is they say like, yeah, that's normal. Second thing is often at the end of these episodes, I'll ask people, anything else you want to say? And quite often I get the answer, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it. Like, I just don't get to talk about this stuff. So, right, even people who are willing to come forward and tell their story publicly are not having these conversations regularly. Like, so I try to, with my team, just kind of keep them updated on like where I'm at any kind of given time, like if I'm in a high or a low, because it forces me to talk about it. And it turns out forcing me to talk about it gets me outside of my head a little bit. Oh, man. You think you found the solution, and then the solution doesn't work quite as well as you thought it did. For me, I take medications. Actually, I take 2 medications now. I try and meditate, try and exercise, try and eat right, try and stay connected to friends and family, and I still slide into down patches. Like, I've been in a bit of a slide for a while, and like, wow, yesterday's plane ride was pretty miserable. And that seems to be true for many people. Like, finding a solution that works for a period of time just takes a lot of trial and error and experimentation. I have also found, Reed is a great example, the right job helps. I interviewed somebody who was a systems engineer who works in the support queue. So the support queue comes in prioritized. He has ADHD. Setting priorities is really difficult for him. But the support queue has all the priorities on it. So it's really clear what he needs to work on, right? So actually, I believe that there's work that better suits people based on their condition. I mean, for me, a company that allows me to run fast and slow, right? Like, if I have to operate at the same pace all the time, or you need someone who operates that way, I am not your man. But more importantly, I think talk about organizations. I'm not an expert and I don't have a formula yet. This is just some things that I've figured out from talking to a bunch of people. But I think the first thing is this. Take a good, honest look at yourself and your company. If you're a leader in particular, I know there's some sort of CEOs and founders in the room. if your company is the kind of company where people are a little sort of leery of taking a sick day because they've got, diarrhea or they're vomiting or something like that, or like they've got a cold and they still feel like they have to come into the office. If people aren't comfortable talking about, their physical health, I just wouldn't bother with mental health. Just don't, because I don't think you're ready at that point. Like, figure out how to talk about physical health first, and that is the stone on which you can then start talking about mental health. 2, there's really easy ways to get educated. You can go read, well, 1, listen to my podcast, obviously. 2, go read WebMD. You want to find out about bipolar, go read WebMD. One thing though, it will be the most extreme version of the condition, right? So find out what you read and then maybe back it off by about 40% or something like that. But it can be very helpful for just understanding the symptoms and what's facing somebody. So if someone comes and says, hey, I have PTSD, just go do a little reading about it. Most companies' resources for mental health are anemic. You have a health plan. You have an EAP that literally nobody ever uses, and probably nothing else. That's the reality for most companies. We've got very progressive companies in the room. I know many of you are doing a lot better than that. But there are people here Modern Health, for example, companies trying to provide tools that help people get access to care, help people understand if they've got issues. So go seek out some of those resources. But then finally, I would say what I've done today. We need people to tell these stories. And I tell this story a lot. I just need to keep telling it, right? Because every time one person is willing to tell a story about their mental illness and their life experience and how it's affected them, it makes it human. It makes it real. It brings it from something that's stuck in here into the real world. If you're a founder or somebody working in HR, if somebody in a senior position tells this story, it is so powerful. I literally got an email as I sat here this morning from somebody on our team who was telling me about how his anxiety was through the roof and he just wanted to reach out to somebody and just sort of say that. And that wouldn't have happened. He would have been stuck had I not come forth and said hey, I have a thing, I want to talk about it. Then I got a text from his manager saying, hey, I need your help to figure out how to support this person in what they're going through. That's what happens when you start telling stories. Even if you don't get the resources right, even if you don't have, good, care, at least people being able to be out and in the open and talk about what's going on helps a great deal. And so with that, I think I'm done.